This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Okay, this is the second lecture on chapter 19 of dealing with semi-variable costs. Now, in the previous lecture, I revised the high-low approach, which, without repeating it all, I said was very quick, straightforward, but a bit dangerous, very approximate, because we'd only looked at the highest and the lowest. The second method that we're going to look at, which is regression analysis, is, for reasons I'm about to explain, somewhat more accurate. Because you see, I said before that if we drew what we call a scatter graph, if I drew a graph of costs against units, in a perfect world, it would be a straight line, but in the real world, it's not going to be perfect. You stand to get something like this. Where, okay, it does look more or less linear. But obviously, they're not all exactly on a straight line. Well, what we do with regression, instead of just taking the highest and lowest and joining them up, we find the line that most nearly goes through all the points. Now, doing it by hand, I mean, we could argue all day whether that's the line or whether it's slightly different. The method we use and the formulae that we're going to use, what they do effectively is find the line which minimizes the squares of the distances of the points away from it. Some people call it the method of least squares. We arithmetically find an equation for a line that most nearly goes through them. It minimizes, as I say, the squares of all those distances away. And when I say the equation of a line, you'll remember from the previous lecture that if we can identify the variable cost per unit and the fixed cost per period, per month in that last one, then we can write a little equation of the form y equals a plus bx, where y is the total cost. It's equal to the fixed cost plus b, the variable cost per unit, times the number of units. Now, I did write an equation out for the last one. I think the total cost was 1560, I think the fixed cost was, plus 2 times number of units, 2x, where 2 was the variable cost per unit. And our job is to find the values of A and of B. As I say, in the previous one, A was $15.60, B was $2. Well, we're going to do the same sort of thing, find a similar sort of equation for example 2. And if you look at example 2, it shows the number of units produced each month and the total cost incurred. For each of how many months there? 7 months. So 100 units in January, the cost was 40,000. 400 units in February, it was 65,000, and so on. We need values for B and A. And the formulae, well, they're printed in the notes there, but also they are given you on the formula sheet. It says A is sigma y over n. Well, I'll write down, then I can go through the symbols. A is equal to sigma y over n minus b sigma x over n. And we call the variables x and y, as we have there. X will be the number of units, y will be the cost. Well, sigma means sum of, or total of. So sigma y is the total of all the y variables that we're given, sigma x the total of all the x variables. N is the number of pairs of observations. So I'll put all the numbers in a minute, but all I mean here, we've got the number of units and the cost for each of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months. So we've 7 sets, 7 pairs of observations. B, look back at that equation, B is the variable cost per unit. There's another formula to get B. B is N sigma xy minus sigma x times sigma y divided by N sigma x squared minus sigma x all squared. Well, again, sigma means total of. So we know sigma x is the total of all the x's, sigma y is the total of all the y's. Sigma xy is the total of all the x times y's. And sigma x squared, the total of all the x squareds. So it's a lot of arithmetic work, it's speed on the calculator, but let's set them up. I'll do it as a table. First of all, x and y. X, remember, is the number of units, and y is the dependent variable, the total cost. And so let's list them all. But I'm going to keep it a bit simpler. Instead of putting 100 units, 400 units, 200 units, to make the arithmetic a bit smaller, I'll show x in hundreds. So instead of writing 100, I'll write 1, 4, 2, 7, 6, 5, 3. And similarly, the cost, instead of writing, note it says at the top thousands, instead of writing 40,000, 65,000, having great big numbers, sorry, that one was in hundreds, I put one too many zeros. Hundreds. This one is going to be in thousands. So 40, 65, 45, 80, 70, 70, 50. Now you don't need to do that. By all means, February, write down 100 units and write down 40,000 cost. It's just that you'll see in a minute, you'll end up with such big numbers. You've got zeros flying around all over the place. No problem. By all means, do what I've done. Units in hundreds, costs in thousands. I'll just need to remember at the very end that my x is actually in hundreds, my y is actually in thousands. Now let's start getting what we need for the formula. We need sigma x. Well, sigma x is the total of all the x's. 1, 5, 7, 14, 20, 28 is sigma x. We need sigma y. It's the total of all the y's. 5, 10, 1, 11, 15, 23, 30, 37. I get a total of 420. That is sigma y. What else do we need? Look back at the formula. We need sigma xy. Well, that's the total of, in each case, x times y. So the first one times 40 is 40. The next one, 4 times 65 is 260. 2 times 45 is 90. 7 times 80 is 560. 420. 350. 150. The total? I get 1870. That's the total of all the xy's. It's sigma xy. What else do I need? Look back at the formula. I need x squared, sigma x squared. Well, x squared, 1 squared is 1, 4 squared is 16, 4, 49, 36, 25, 9. Add them up. 1, 7, 11, 20, 26, 31, 44, 5, 9, 12, 140. Now, if you're doing this with me, don't throw this away because we will need to do something else later. But I think now we've got everything we need for our formula. We're going to have to do B first, if you think about it, because the formula for A has B in it. So B, it's n sigma xy minus sigma x sigma y divided by n sigma x squared minus sigma x all squared. I'll do it step by step, but this really is calculator work. The more efficient you are with your calculator, the more you can sort of do 2 steps in one. However, n, remember, is the number of sets of observations, which is 7. So it's 7 times sigma xy 1870 minus sigma x times sigma y 28 times 420 divided by n sigma x squared, so 7 times, I've written sigma y squared, it was x squared and I added them up sigma x squared, I'm sorry. So 7 times 140 minus sigma x all squared, sigma x is 28. Now, as I say, you should be able to do several steps at once if you're efficient with your calculator, but to avoid any upset, the top 7 times 1870 is 13,090. 28 times 420 is 11,760. Divided by 7 times 140 is 980 minus 28 squared, 784, which is what? 13,090 minus 11,760, 1330, divided by 980 minus 784, 196, which finally comes to 6.7857. And I'll talk about how many decimal places to go to shortly. In fact, normally I would just go to 2 and put 6.79. There's no need to go to lots and lots of places, but I'll come back to why I've chosen 4 places shortly. Having got B, now we can use the other formula to get A. A is sigma y over n minus b sigma x over n. Again, you are given the formulae in the exam, which is what? Sigma y is 420, n, the number of pairs of observations, is 7, minus b, which we've just calculated, 6.7857, times sigma x, which is 28, again divided by 7. 420 over 7 is 60, minus 27.1428, which equals 32.852. Well, now we've got it. The equation, remember, if you look back to the start, we're looking for an equation where's it gone? Oh, it was on the notes, I'm sorry. Y equals A plus BX. So Y is 32.8572 minus B, 6.7857, X. Now, that's fine, except just one little problem here, in that if you remember, when I wrote the Y's down, the Y's were all in thousands. And so, Y, the actual cost, isn't going to be 32.8, it's going to be 32,872. So, if I correct it, it goes 32,857.2, but I'm not worried about 0.2, I'll do it to the nearest dollar. And that, of course, is the fixed cost. Minus, well, again, Y was in thousands, so it should be 6,000 times X. But my X's were in hundreds. So we need to multiply by 1,000, but divide by 100, which is the same as multiplying by 10, 67.86x. And 67.86 is the variable cost. And so there we are, our variable cost per unit. And there we are, there is our equation. We've found the fixed cost per month, the variable cost per unit. Now, before I say a few words about that, don't worry too much about being asked to do all of that in the exam. They're not going to give you one of this size for just 2 marks. It would be ridiculous. But they can and they will test you on each bit of it, so they can test that you understand what sigma means in the formula. They could, for example, give you these totals and then expect you to put the figures into the formula. So they'll be testing on bits of a whole calculation, not on the whole calculation itself. But there we are. I explained before why it's a better way, perhaps, of calculating, splitting out the semi-variable cost into fixed and variable, but it's still not perfect. One problem is that it does assume there is a linear relationship. It does assume that, all right, we accept things aren't perfect, but it does assume that the points do lie more or less on a straight line, and we found the line that most nearly goes through them. But it could be like this. And of course, if it looked like that, or you can still use equations to find a line that most nearly goes through them. But it's clearly not linear, it's a curve. And you can't be expected to deal with curves, but it would mean what we've done is all rather stupid. The other reservation we'd have, a bit like high-low, is it's dangerous to forecast outside the range. Just as I said with high-low, you see, it may be that our observations are very, very linear, but we can't assume they would carry on being linear. Maybe it sort of goes like this. So it's only valid to forecast within the range. However, my first problem was it assumes there's a linear relationship, and we don't know. You know, I didn't put those on a graph. If we did put them on a graph, I think it is reasonably linear, but we don't know. However, as you'll see in the next lecture, there is a way of measuring how near it is to being a straight line. Because obviously the more linear it is, the more accurate our results are. The less linear it is, the more what we've done perhaps becomes a waste of time. So we've one more formula, but in the next lecture I'll show you with the same example how we can go about measuring how linear the relationship actually is. But that's the next lecture.